Hey everybody, Samsara here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to share a video clip from a conference called The Electric Vehicle Ecosystem, Progress on All Fronts. This was hosted by Roth Capital Partners and Force Family Office. The segment features Ryan Melsert, CEO of American Battery Technology Company, and other industry leaders who are focused on electrification in the US. I think this content will be useful for anyone who's interested in investing in electrification and our clean future. Just a heads up, this is another Zoom seminar. It looked like Ryan had some issues with his microphone during the introduction, but he comes back with good quality later. There's some really great Q&A spread throughout the video. Particularly, I like the last question where Ryan talks about his experience working for Tesla Gigafactory, the pros and the cons, and what he's taken from that experience to be successful at his new career at American Battery Technology Company. So let's get to that conference. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Callie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. Today, we have a fantastic panel, and one of the most intelligent and independent voices in EV, which is Craig Irwin, who's going to moderate and lead this panel. Craig Irwin is Managing Director and Senior Research Analyst leading Roth Capital's clean tech coverage in biofuels, advanced lighting, and the company's providing products and services that enable the utility of the future, including batteries and electric vehicles. Prior to joining Roth Capital, Craig worked at such firms running clean tech analysis at Wedbush and Merriman Kurhan, where his equity research experience in the sector reaches back to 2001. Mr. Irwin has also served as Director of Corporate Strategy for a public energy storage company, where he completed the acquisition of leading energy storage and technology companies. Mr. Irwin has a BS from the University of Rochester. And as I said, he is absolutely one of the most intelligent and independent voices on Wall Street. So with that said, it is my great pleasure to welcome Craig Irwin. Craig?
Thank you, Steve. Those are some pretty strong comments. Hopefully I'll live up to them. So I appreciate that introduction. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. We have an exciting crew, some thought leaders, and a pretty good spectrum from across the space as far as where they participate today. Let me just give you a super quick intro to sort of who's who. So, actually, sorry, before I get started, I do need to just mention my disclosures. So Roth has done investment banking for Ideanomics. We've completed an investment banking transaction for them within the last year. We do trade the stock, and the stock could be subject to the penny stock rules. And that's my legal disclosure, my legal obligation for FINRA there. So on to the good stuff, right? So Alf, alphabetically, right? Alf Poor is CEO of Ideanomics. This company's got a great vision around fleets navigating the barrier to electrification. And they have a really interesting approach as far as several different verticals to chase that opportunity. Andrew Fox is the founder and CEO of Charge Enterprises. They have a location selection, engineering, installation, testing, etc. Right? A full service portfolio for EV charging stations, helping customers make the right decisions there. Ryan Melsert from American Battery is a battery recycler, right? It's one of the emerging battery recyclers, one of the real issues as EVs grow. And then Kevin Chin, the CEO of VivoPower, does a variety of different things, solar, microgrids, batteries, EVs. It has also a portfolio approach. With that, I'd like to give the mic over to each of these CEOs and ask if they could just give us a quick introduction to your company. And just give us a snapshot on the role you play in the broader EV universe and the opportunity out there. Alf, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Craig, and thanks for that great introduction. Welcome to you and all the other panelists joining us, and thanks to the Force Family Office team for putting this together. Ideanomics is a very interesting company. We're focused on the commercial EV sector, and we have a few interesting parts to the organization, because we cover everything from energy storage and charging systems through to vehicles as well. And not only do we cover kind of the full value chain to help commercial fleet operators transition into electrification and potentially hydrogen in the future, we also have global operations. So we're quite uniquely focused to be able to service both regional commercial fleet operators and those with a global footprint as well, because we do have operations out of North America, Europe and Asia as well. And we think we're well positioned for capturing market share, both in the short, medium and long term. And we've got some exciting companies within the Ideanomics Mobility Group.
Cool. Love it. So, Andrew, can you give us your introduction to Charge Enterprises?
Sure. First of all, to resonate what Alf said, thank you everybody for organizing this and having us. Charge, similar to Ideanomics, we operate in 19 countries. We're 3 years old. We're on a revenue run rate this year to do over $400 million of revenue. And I like to say we do the work that others don't. We're providing the infrastructure services around EV and telecommunications, up and down the food chain. We have a very, very specific focus on the 17,000 US auto dealers as the first to upgrade their facilities. But I encourage people to think about all the EV companies out there and their ambitions. Without the infrastructure, without people actually providing the boots on the ground to put the systems in and manage those systems, and that's not just the EV systems, from the grid to the transmission lines. There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be upgraded, and so that's what Charge does. We're about 200 people today. And like I said, we're just about to approach our 3rd year anniversary in January.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ryan, can you give us the elevator pitch on American Battery Technology, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having us. It's great to be here. So American Battery Technology Company has 3 different units. As you mentioned, you have a lithium-ion battery recycling. This is where we're able to take in full end-of-life batteries, as well as different types of manufacturing defects and waste from the electric vehicle industry, the stationary grid storage industry, and all different types of electronics. And we're able to actually take these entire battery systems together while they're still assembled, while they're still charged, and recycle them, extract individual metals, and upgrade them all the way back to battery cathode grade feedstocks that are needed to enter back into the market. Separately, we also own and lease large amounts of land in the Western US that is lithium bearing, and we're working with partners who also have nickel and cobalt bearing resources in the US.
Hi, Ryan, I'm so sorry. People are having a hard time hearing you. Maybe hold your microphone closer to your mouth, or get closer to the computer. Thank you.
Okay, we can try to get closer. And mentioning, we also own the large amounts of land in the Western US. We're working to extract these metals from primary materials and also sell those back into the market.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction, Ryan. Sorry for the interruption, but if you could turn up the volume, that would be great, because people want to hear. That's the good news. Moving on to Kevin from VivoPower. Kevin, how would you explain your company's positioning to investors? What's your introduction to everybody that's looking for ideas here?
Sure. Thanks, Craig, and thanks to the team at Fort and Roth for inviting us. So VivoPower, we're a sustainable energy solutions company. We're focused on helping our corporate customers accelerate towards their net zero carbon goals. And we do this by offering a holistic end-to-end solution that comprises 3 elements. First element is fleet electrification. Second element is converting critical power on-site to renewable generation. And the third one is the reuse of batteries from the vehicles typically for the on-site power requirements. Our focus is on what we call hard to decarbonize sectors. So they include mining, oil and gas, infrastructure, and utilities. Where the moat, if you will, is the fact that everything needs to be ruggedized and or customized for the harsh operating conditions of these. This is, as I mentioned, it's a niche market, but it's a very big niche. So conservatively, we estimate it to be north of 30 billion globally. In the last 9 months, we've signed up over 750 million of commitment orders for our fleet electrification solutions, particularly from the mining sector.
That's an impressive book of business. Thank you. So one of the things I'm really excited about is the inevitability of EVs, right? Nobody is really questioning this at the moment, right? It used to be a question a year ago, a couple of years ago, but the evidence is at a point where almost everybody believes that EVs are inevitably going to be a material piece of the fleet out there, commercial, consumer, etc., right? Industrial. What I'm excited about is the growth opportunity here is going to be astounding over the next many years. And the title of this the seminar, when I helped craft it with the rest of my partners, we wanted to underline that there's progress on many fronts, right? The success of the EV industry is multilateral. It's not just cars rolling down the road. It's not just a company beginning with T. And there are many different ways to invest in this opportunity. So I just wanted to ask each of the CEOs here, right? Can you maybe discuss where you're seeing the most exciting growth in your business? And what's your vision for growth, in a specific product group or market? And how are things accelerating versus what's described out there? Are we seeing fleets play the way we want? Are we seeing the material supply chain actually catch up to the demand? These are the bigger questions. So with that, Alf, you've got a nice portfolio of different things in there. What are you most excited about from the growth standpoint? Over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in an interesting phase right now. We're just starting to get the legislation in place for commercial, which is why you've seen it lagging behind the passenger vehicle sector. One of the most interesting things for us right now is something that both Kevin and Andrew touched on, which is getting this infrastructure built out so that there is sufficient charging capability out there on a global basis to support the needs of commercial fleets. We're seeing tremendous appetite in the sector to get into clean energy generation, i.e. solar, the energy storage for that solar generation, and then and energy storage also as a grid augmentation product, because to Andrew's point, the utilities don't have enough power to supply right now. And then, of course, the charging systems that go with those. And we have a tremendous amount of interest in the wireless charging that we do, the inductive wireless for commercial vehicles. So our Wave business unit continues to grow its pipeline very aggressively, and we're bringing online those other services as part of one of Kristen Helsel in our group's initiatives to get us into the infrastructure side of it as well, because that seems to be the near-term win, and then the longer-term win is around the vehicles as well. So we feel we're well positioned to capture market during what we think is the build-out phase now for the infrastructure. And then, of course, with the vehicles, with VIA and Medici and our two-wheeler categories as well, I think we're well placed to service the full value chain.
Thank you, Alf. Thank you. So, Andrew, the beauty about charging is, everybody's asking chicken or the egg, right? Do we need charging first? Do we need EVs first? And I think regulators have picked up, and our good government representatives have picked up on the fact that we really do need charging infrastructure for people to be able to drive these vehicles. So it is something that's front center in the minds of a lot of people, and with the actions hopefully in DC. What area do you see as sort of the most exciting part of your growth mix? And how are these solutions coming together for you as you look at the growth trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a business model standpoint, I come from a real estate background. Location selection today is really important in terms of the proximity, right? Imagine you're in a 10-mile backup on a hot summer day in an electric vehicle, and it's happening. There's all this anxiety around that. So the infrastructure that we're thinking about, is a little different because the utilization rates today are very low. So from a business model standpoint, you have to really have the government involved to subsidize the infrastructure today. Because from a commercial standpoint, it's really unreasonable to think, anybody's going to put something in front of, a location as a critical amenity and it's only going to be used, 5% of the time. And so what's so exciting to us right now is, and this is why I focus on, and I think it's the key to our success, on U.S. auto dealers. They have a mandatory upgrade from the OEMs that have to take place. So for me, the most exciting part of my business is staying focused on our cause, which is making sure that the U.S. auto dealers, first and foremost, can sell their vehicles that are electric. And so then when you zoom out, there's a really long tail, and we kind of published this in our Q2 earnings, and I'll continue to kind of lay out our plan. But, when you think about the long tail outside of U.S. auto dealers, it's now the Hampton Inns and the Marriotts and all these places that their overnight guests are going to need a critical amenity to charge. And so for us, we're very focused kind of in our sector. There's just, so much revenue there. I think to Ideanomics' point and to Kevin's point, we're in conversations on infrastructure charging. We hired the former president of Ford Canada. The fleet business for Ford is like a $40 billion a year business. And so they're apt to solve this problem. We're apt to help them solve it. And so, that's the most exciting parts of our business. But I don't want to forget that, we still have our feet firmly planted in the 5G world. And we continue to accelerate into that space as well. And that's because we do eventually see, this kind of converging. And that will be, this is a 30-year bell curve. We're about to start here. We're probably 2 years away from it starting. And so as these things converge, I think telecommunications and infrastructure for EV also converge as autonomous vehicles come online.
Perfect. So Ryan, just knowing the fundamentals of the battery supply chain, right? That a lot of the material that's showing up for recycling now is stuff that was put into cars, 8 to 10 years ago. The growth phase for you is really exciting, right? You're just probably just kissing the tip of the iceberg, right? And we've seen what the deliveries have been for the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about this growth and what the industry is doing to prepare for responsible recycling of post-use batteries and what the opportunity is? I mean, the visibility there has got to help you a lot with the investor group out there. How do you explain this?
Yes, thank you for the question. Hopefully you can hear me better now. But in general, the situation is really not just about end-of-life batteries. While a large amount have been sold the past few years, and those will be coming back to the market, I think sometimes people underestimate how many types of waste and defects are made on the manufacturing side. So my background is, helping to design, one of the first battery gigafactories outside of Reno. So early on, we had, a decent amount of defects and yield losses as we went to ramp up a first of kind factory. And if you look at the whole US right now, the total manufacturing capacity of all lithium-ion battery factories combined is around 40 gigawatt hours per year. Including just the plants announced under construction, there will be about 400 gigawatt hours per year just in the US. And each one of those plants end up having, 15, 20, 25% on a mass basis of all their material be a waste or a defect or a test product that immediately just needs to be recycled. So that's an extremely large amount on an energy basis. And this first pre-commercial battery recycling plant that we currently have under construction just outside of Reno is intentionally sized where it's large enough, where it uses representative equipment of what a much larger facility would use, but it's still small enough where it's fed by even just this type of manufacturing waste, plus early end-of-life vehicles coming back, plus the consumer electronics and stationary storage side. So when people look at these very large electric vehicle factories going up and these very large cell factories going up, they think, the US is having a big entrance into this field. But if you look at the four main battery metals that go into these production, the lithium, the nickel, the cobalt, the manganese, less than 1% of global manufacturing capacity of each of those four is in the US. So these very large cell and vehicle manufacturing plants still have to import almost the entirety of these materials. And that makes it more expensive for them, having to pay for transport and tariffs. It has a security of supply issue. We've seen, global supply chains really break down over the past few years. And it also is an environmental concern, really not having visibility into your full supply chain upstream. So both our recycling group and our primary lithium extraction division that we have in the US are addressing this by bringing the production of all of these battery metals to the US to then feed these new battery cell facilities.
Excellent. Just a follow-up in there, right? You did call out the manufacturing scrap, and I guess you're also including the R&D cells, post testing, post evaluation. Today, what do you see as more material, right? There's a tremendous amount of activity developing new lines and bringing the technology forward with R&D investment. But we are sort of, there's a lag for those vehicles to come in. I mean, what is more material for you right now as a driver of, tonnage for recycling?
Tonnage right now is really dominated by this type of manufacturing waste. And in the US, there really is only, one large cell manufacturing facility at the moment, but many more under construction. And it's during those commissioning phases we actually make the most waste, both because the processes are relatively immature, and also the qualification cells that a new facility has to make, it's tens of millions of cells are made just to be tested and then just to be disposed of. So for each of these new facilities coming online, that's a major source of material, but that's in addition to the end-of-life vehicles and the consumer electronics that we're receiving already.
Excellent. Kevin, how would you frame the close near-term growth drivers for VivoPower, right? There's a lot of interest in many of the different things that you touched, right? Microgrids, batteries, solar. There's a portfolio of things that people know the growth rates. But how would you kind of unpack how this opportunity is materializing for you, and how you see the scenario sort of taking shape over the next couple of years?
Sure. So best way to unpack that is through the lens of customers. So if we take a big mining group such as BHP or what they're looking to do is obviously decarbonize their operations. And I was saying before, we deliver three key limbs in terms of a solution for that. Number one is to electrify the fleet of vehicles on the mine sites. Number two is to convert their mine sites into more renewable power generation. So that's where the solar, the microgrids, the charge stations, and the batteries come in. And then thirdly, touching a little bit on what Ryan was talking about, the reuse of the batteries initially, and then ultimately recycling. Reuse is interesting in a mining context in particular, because most pickup trucks or utility vehicles will only last for 18 months, 2 years on a mine site. Charge capacity of the batteries will still be at 80 to 85%. So there's a very good opportunity to reuse those batteries on the site. Right now, in terms of growth vectors, we're very much seeing Tembo, which is our electric vehicle conversion business, really be the driver for the next 2 to 3 years, and that's where the $750 million orders comes from. We expect that will then sort of translate into growth horizon number 2, which will see our critical power business, which today generates about 40 million revenue, pick up the growth mantle and really scale from there. And then the third horizon of growth will be the reuse. Will really start 5 years from now.
Understood. Thank you. So that was a nice spectrum, but consistent from everyone. So I love it. So the next topic I wanted to touch on is regulatory, right? Alf, you mentioned regulatory before. We all really appreciate the government support, everything from the incentive tax credit, the EV infrastructure credits, you're $7,500 off if you buy a car in the U.S., except for one manufacturer. These are things that have really helped us, and there's a package that people have been trying to move forward in DC that could be a lot more generous, right? I'm a big believer that businesses that are of sound economic sense don't need subsidies, but they benefit from them. It transforms things faster. And the uncertainty of the last 9 months has been a little bit of a frustration, brought some volatility into the equities. And I wanted to just give everybody an opportunity to talk about the incentives out there. Is the money being spent wisely? Have we seen the appropriate ROI on the money that has been dispersed to date? This transformation is on its way. If we do see the disbursement of the monies that President Biden would like to see dispersed, what could this do for the industry from your perspective? I'll start off again with Alf, if that's okay. Alf, what's your view, sort of talking regulatory? Do we really need this? Things are great, and is it icing on the cake, I guess is my question.
I think we do unequivocally need support from the government to do this. There's a transition going on. The technology transition in the vehicles is one aspect of it, but the transition in the energy demand is the bigger issue here. And you've seen these fantastic subsidiaries for passenger cars, and of course, anybody owning an EV like you do, Craig, I do. We can put a level 2 charger in our home, connected up, and we have the majority of our charging needs taken care of, and obviously the vehicle as well. It's a little different in the commercial sector. We've only just seen the first legislation come out in the last couple of weeks talking about maybe up to 30% of a commercial vehicle cost. More needs to be done. At the moment, because of the upfront investment in EVs, particularly commercial EVs, much larger, much more complex machines than a passenger car, the costs are there as well. And this, we do need a good deal of help. And of course, we weren't helped by the midterms the other day. Many of us are fostering and nurturing relationships with local governments. And then if the local government changes, that can be quite disruptive because a whole new team will come in with a new governor. So, I've been disappointed at the slow pace of it. As you mentioned, the equities market for the commercial fleet operators has been impacted because, the Biden administration came out with this big $2 trillion number. That got folks excited, and it's been slowly walked back and negotiated to a much more reasonable number. They need to progress that quickly. The utilities need support. The commercial fleet operators need support because with the ubiquitous availability of electricity, it's not like running gasoline and diesel-based vehicles. There is a capital equipment cost and incentive in infrastructure that every commercial fleet operator need to be able to do exactly what you and I do with our passenger cars, which is charge them back at base, which is our homes every night, right? So I'm looking to the government to, look for some bipartisan support, get this thing accelerated, because essentially the commercial fleet operators we're talking to are happy to invest in the infrastructure because they know they need it, but they're really sitting on their hands and waiting to understand what the vehicle subsidies are before they start buying the vehicles. And that's been the biggest challenge, I think, of 2021.
Absolutely. I would agree with you on that, I think. Andrew, EV infrastructure, right? Charging infrastructure has been, a really fruitful opportunity for you. And there have been very specific points of support. What regulatory items are you most focused on? What do you have the most hope for? And what's your view? Is this absolutely necessary? Is this helpful? How do you see this?
I mean, I think first and foremost, you need a single charging protocol. That would be a good start. I think everything that Alf said is so spot on. It's almost like the other day, someone tweeting out to Elon Musk, send $6 billion to solve UN world hunger. If the government does not step up, then private individuals are going to have to figure this out. Private, equity of sorts is going to have to come in. But the good news is the train has left the station. It is electric. It is coming. Domestically, we're behind because other governments around the world have been a little bit more forward thinking on this. But I think it's coming. The fact of the matter is that, we need to address the infrastructure. And you might think it's fruitful, but I think this is a 30-year fruit coming. This is a long, it's like being at the dawn of the cell phone industry. As utilization 35 years ago of cell phones was 1%. It's the same thing, 1-2% and hovering and then slowly, and then it just shot up. So the same thing is going to happen with the electrification. It just, the infrastructure needs to come. And I think you said this before, the chicken and the egg. It is somewhat chicken and the egg because the biggest challenge is that the infrastructure cost itself is so staggering that unless a government subsidizes it, it's very, very hard for private businesses just to get out in front of it and do it. And I think what Alf is doing and what some of the other people are doing is we're focusing on niche areas right now where we know there are dollars being spent. And that's why we focus on the infrastructure, not only just in EV, but telecommunication, because it's got a very, very predictable earning stream. And we're at 5G now. And I think that, 30 years from now, we'll probably be at 5G of our EV charging systems, and you won't have a level 2 charger at your house. And you guys know this. Your level 2 charger might not even be able to give you the full capacity of it because your home electric company, you just might need to upgrade your panels there. And so there's all this interesting stuff coming. I think the government has to play a larger role in it. But I also think that it's individuals like all of us trying to figure out the niche markets in the early stages, build predictable revenue streams, and then leverage those over the next 20, 30 years into really bigger opportunities that we all see coming.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ryan, when I look at recycling, right, I look at the conventional automotive industry, right, with lead acid batteries as an example, where we recycle about 99% of the batteries out there, and that does benefit from regulations in place. Can you maybe help us understand where we're at with the regulations around lithium-ion pack disposal or R&D cell disposals? Do we have the same mandates and possible core charges and things like this in place? Is this stuff that's really just starting to take shape at the moment? And then as far as regulatory support, subsidies have been generous in other areas, but I think there's maybe an opportunity on the recycling front. Where do you see the sort of federal fund flows or state fund flows into the recycling opportunity?
That's right. I mean, as far as closed loop economies, the lead acid battery system is usually shown as the paradigm of what everyone else could be. And that really came out of a few areas. One of it was, the regulations that essentially had the deposits paid every time they're purchased. Another one was the standardization in the industry. So how many of the lead acid batteries now are very standard design that make them much easier to process. But the big difference is the metals inside lithium-ion batteries are inherently valuable. So there's an incentive to return them to market. to date, many of the recycling processes have not been especially efficient, very high capital costs. They really weren't even designed to recycle lithium-ion batteries. They were much more about recycling general scrap metals. And because of that, they really didn't recover many of the elements of value within a battery. And because of that, they really had to be paid to take material in, like a tipping fee at a landfill. But now, as much more rigorous designs that were specifically designed for these materials come into play, there is, economic profit that can be made by doing this, which removes some of the need to have these types of deposits or regulations. It kind of takes it away from the stick side of the equation, much more towards the carrot. But beyond just those regulations, again, the security of supply is one of the bigger issues right now. So as a country, we are vulnerable by having almost 100% of the metals to make these batteries be sourced out of the country. These very large cell and vehicle factories coming online will be stranded assets if they can't source these types of materials. So regulations to really incentivize the domestic production of these battery metals, either through primary harvesting or through recycling, really is in the strategic interest of corporations in the US, as well as the US government and people themselves.
No, that makes complete sense. Then can you respond maybe to the federal support here, right? So in the lead acid industry, it's more sort of a bit of a stick, right, with the EPA compliance and regulatory in different states. I mean, is there anything that's available or you think could be available that we should watch for that would lubricate the financial opportunity here for investors?
Definitely. So there's different levels of the scale. We've been fortunate enough over the past year to win, 2 government grants through the Department of Energy, one through the Advanced Manufacturing Office, one through the Vehicle Technology Office, that are really meant to prove out processes at pilot scale before they're commercial. We're also working with a different group in the Department of Energy, which has, very large amounts of near zero interest loans that really help scale up facilities. And those really let you bring these new technologies to market much more quickly. Within the US, the Department of Energy, there's also a group called the Critical Materials Institute, which really is about focusing different types of R&D technologies and working to scale them up for strategic US interests. So back at the start of the year, they asked me to join their board, their technology advisory board. So really working with different institutes in the US to align capabilities and then to commercialize these technologies. Those are really about the federal government facilitating the scale up, both on the recycling side and on the primary metal manufacturing side, to really bring more of these materials to market, to make this a closed loop within our specific region and our geography.
Cool, thank you. So Kevin, you bring a little bit more of an international perspective here, right? There's some very large programs in Europe and in Australia, not just in the US. Can you explain the regulatory environment and how it's working? I know that, Australia's been really progressive in its regulation around carbon, well out ahead of what's being done in the United States. But can you maybe, give us a regulatory snapshot of what impacts your operations?
Sure. So you're right, Craig. We have far greater operations outside of the US than within the US. And key markets are Australia, Canada, parts of Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And so 2 things I'll touch on. Firstly, in terms of subsidies. So if we look at Australia, whilst they've been ahead of the game on carbon, subsidies have been relatively few and far between for the longest time. And I've got a similar view to you that ultimately we've got to be able to stand on our own in terms of so thankfully what's happening in the mining sector in particular is that what's driving, I guess, the growth that we're seeing is not just the ESG dynamic, but the economic benefit. And for an average miner now to electrify the fleet is hands down going to save them money versus, diesel, which is 2 to 3 times more expensive on a mine site than a capital city. So the subsidy equation isn't really one that affects us in terms of our key markets. And again, if you look at Asia, if you look at LATAM, Africa, hardly any subsidies, if any. Europe, yes, there are some generous incentives there, and that's been real positive for them. The second thing I'll touch on is regulation. Our challenge from a regulatory perspective is more of how do we meet the safety requirements for some of the sectors that we're focused on. Mining, for example, have pretty nuanced requirements from a standards perspective, and what we have to do is basically idiot-proof, on my language here, the use of electric vehicles on a mine site, because one will stand in a puddle with a charger and think, what will happen? So that's more of the regulatory challenge that we seek to deal with, and less so the issues around on-road homologation, etc. We're operating off-road environment.
So I guess just to summarize, it sounds like there's some very practical regulatory support out there from an implementation, from market reality standpoint, and that there's also subsidies and stimulatory funding widely available in different pockets. I mean, more is better. But I will say the one thing that surprised me, and that nobody talked about, is the hundreds of billions spent every year subsidizing the oil and gas industry, where this is not a forwards-looking industry. This is a backwards-looking industry. They get accelerated depreciation and all sorts of other tax benefits that far outweigh everything given to the electric vehicle or sustainable technology industry. And, people very often overlook that what is requested and what is asked for is a drop in the bucket versus what's been given to oil and gas over the last many, many years. The humility of the panel I like. And, I think that's one of the reasons that, things are being heard well by our regulators here in DC and internationally as well. Kevin, it sounds like things are pretty constructive. So the next thing I want to ask about is a very important subject. Every investor call, every call I get, I'm sure every call you get these days, everybody wants to talk about supply chain and commodities pricing. People are talking about, having to put things on jets to get components from Asia, difficulties getting things in and out of ports. I want to ask each of you, and actually I'll swap things in order this time, because I said I would do that to the panelists just to keep things fair. So Kevin, commodities, supply chain, how is this playing for you? I mean, is this maybe making things a little sticky for your business right now? Is this not interfering with the backlog growth and the demand growth that you're seeing? How would you explain this to investors?
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge has been the border closures in Australia, where most of the demands mining is coming from, and in a practical sense, it's very difficult. Not so much in terms of the kits that we assemble, out of the Netherlands at the moment, and ultimately we need to move close to our customers. And COVID has, delayed that. I was supposed to go to Thailand to look at putting in place a microfactory there in January until they shut things down. So border closures have definitely impacted and pushed things to the right with deliveries. It hasn't held up in terms of orders. I think that's because, as I mentioned before, the economics of this stack up, for the mining companies, and they want to be ahead of the queue, so to speak. They all realize that there's a supply chain constraint. So it's more of the border closures. It's more of getting the vehicle kits, the vehicle vehicles themselves as opposed to our kits and the components of our kits, the type of batteries we use that are fit for purpose for a ruggedized environment. Thankfully, they're okay at the moment in terms of supply. So that said, Australia's finally reopening from later this month, so I would think will improve.
Excellent. Yes, there's a facility I'd like to visit in Australia that this 14-day quarantine is problematic. It's the reason I haven't visited it. So I completely understand the frustration there.
That's wise. I did serve 14 days earlier this year when I came back.
It's a tough sentence. Ryan, supply chain, it sounds like you've got a beautiful relationship with your partners, but it's really commodity cost escalation and visibility on what your customers are going to pay, what you're going to pay. How does this factor into the complexities of your business right now? Or is this something that's maybe further out on the horizon that you need to manage?
No, it's definitely important for us. And a lot of the products that we actually make are considered commodities and specialty chemicals. So these, main products, those 4 main battery metals and 5 other scrap materials that we make have gone up in market price substantially over the past half year. So it really is much more of a market pull, encouraging us to put even more capacity on the market to address those. And over the past few years, people have seen this exponential decay in the pricing of lithium-ion batteries. And people just keep extrapolating, picturing this to keep happening. But what has really happened through economies of scale is that the manufacturing portion has decreased, but the amount paid for the feedstocks for the battery metals had stays roughly constant. And now as the manufacturing portion of the cost really has reached what is close to a minimum, we're seeing that there's almost a floor in the price of lithium-ion batteries. They really aren't decreasing anymore. And actually in October, for the first time in over 3 years, the average price of lithium-ion batteries went up. And it really is because of the higher core costs of sourcing these materials. Some of the largest battery companies in the world just on November 1st, a few days ago, actually increased their prices by about 20%. Citing pass-through costs on them sourcing different types of battery metals in the much higher commodity price market. So it definitely is a huge issue. And like I mentioned beforehand, it's not an especially liquid market when so much of the capacity is made in a few areas. So in all of North America, we're still dependent on importing it. And as supply gets more and more tight and there are national security interests, there could be a point where it really isn't financially limited. There simply won't be exporting of these materials out of the source countries. So again, it really is a big security of supply risk to North American companies, in addition to just being higher cost and higher environmental impact.
Thank you. So Andrew, I was just at SEMA this week in Las Vegas and met with a couple of EV companies, a couple of charging companies. And, over the last couple of months, I've been hearing that, if you want to buy units from ABB, it's 6 months to a year for the DC fast charging units, right? And a lot of other companies are very actively debating whether or not they use air freight to go around the bottlenecks in the ports. But air freight is really expensive, particularly when you're talking about those heavy units. How is the supply chain impacting you? I know there's an important services component to what you do that might create a better opportunity, maybe less stress. But how's this working with the supply chain and the commodity environment for your business?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's prohibitively expensive to air freight, and so this is a significant issue. It's going to remain probably. At least for the foreseeable future. This is just a reality that we're dealing with. And I think everybody's plagued by it. It's one of the reasons why I don't, as a company at Charge, have all of our eggs in the EV basket. There are supply issues right now for everybody, that everybody will face headwinds probably through 2023 is what most people are projecting. The market will dictate in certain areas where people want to air freight things in, but I think it's prohibitively expensive unless it's really a critical amenity that needs to be done. But yeah, I mean, we're building a big backlog of business. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But I wouldn't recommend anybody air freight, anything in unless you really critically needed it, because it is just so prohibitively expensive. And I know that because we've had to air freight things in. And just when you look at the unit economics of it, it's insane. But when you're, building out something that's, in the magnitude of some of the things people are building out, the EV charging stations are a rounding error in the grand scheme of things. And so in select instances, when people do it, it's their choice. But I certainly think that it poses a pretty significant threat, especially given just the political climate, how we football back and forth. And so, it remains to be seen how it will play out. But I think that, inevitably it'll all work itself out if we're talking about a 30-year cycle here, right? And any cycle early on, there are always issues. And so I'm still very bullish on it, but I think we all have to be mindful of the fact that there are a tremendous amount of things right now out of most of people's control. And so it's just going to take a little bit of time to get back on track.
It sounds like there's a silver lining in there where domestic manufacturing is getting a tailwind. I mean, is that fair?
I mean, it's got potential. But it also requires significant investment. So, I mean, I think, it's like anything. Level 2 chargers, you're not seeing a massive issue there, but the level, the more powerful commercial level 3, there's definitely a chip shortage and a supply chain issue right now. And I don't know any CEOs in the industry that wouldn't tell you that.
Yeah, no, agreed. No, but it sounds like things are being navigated pretty well. So that's the good news. Alf, what are your thoughts on the supply chain, right? You touch a lot of different interesting things, and you have, because of your sort of portfolio approach, you probably have many different partners that can help you sort of navigate things, source things in different markets, different geographies. How is this playing out? Is this something where you have to be extra nimble to be able to get your products delivered, or is this
we're seeing
a little more blocking
really,
and tackling? Yeah,
we're seeing two really interesting dynamics. The one is the cost and availability of containers. That seems to be working itself out much faster. And then the second one, which is the biggest issue right now, is semiconductors. We see an unfair landscape where the big players, the really big fish, are buying the capacity from the semiconductor manufacturers, to the point that the manufacturers turn to us and say, hey, we're not going to be producing these SKUs for the next 6 months, which are SKUs that you rely on, because we're going to be producing more for these guys who are going to pay us upfront cash, $0 terms, and are going to guarantee us, 2-3 years worth of offtake. So that's made it a little difficult, and very similar to what Andrew mentioned with, air freight. You get the other side of it, which is then you need to go out to the broker community. There's a large brokerage community for chips and electronic components. And similar to shipping things by air, when you go to a broker, you see a lift anywhere 30 to 50% for acquiring the microchips and the semiconductors you need. So we've had a couple of those issues. Luckily, we've been able to, prevent shutdowns of production and things by using sharp elbows, using folks on the board of directors at Ideanomics that are in the semiconductor industry, using brokers and contacts, and literally looking down the back of the sofa for the semiconductors. But we've been able to do it. We have had to pay some broker costs to keep production running at some of our manufacturers, and it impacts everything from vehicles through to energy storage, through to charging systems. These are all sophisticated things. They all rely on semiconductors and microchips to run the software on those particular things, whether it's a car or a charging system. And the semiconductor industry, we're getting quotes of needing to buy 64 weeks in advance right now. So, and that's previously something you wouldn't want to do. You wouldn't want to buy 64 weeks in advance, because the chips will probably develop in the 64 weeks. So you'll then be putting out your 2023 stock with chips in them that are not the latest and greatest. So a little bit of a weird dynamic in the semiconductor industry. Biggest concern I have is geopolitical risk, as most people said, around national supply chain security, because I see a situation developing a little bit like OPEC, the guys that control the raw materials and the low-cost countries producing these chips and components. I hope it doesn't go that way, but obviously it's each supplier's job to do the best deal he can for himself. But semiconductors, I think it'll settle down. Most of the big guys are telling us that they're expanding capacity, but when you hear things like 64 weeks, or we're not going to be producing your SKUs because a behemoth like an Apple or whatever is buying every chip that this capacity can produce at a particular manufacturer, it makes it tough. But sharp elbows, a lot of good contacts, you find a way to get through it, as you know. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. So it sounds like a challenge, but it's navigable. Is that a good summary?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So the last question, because we're bumping up to the back end of the hour. The last question I wanted to ask is if there was one thing you could ask for from the industry, from government, from retail customers, that they do that you think would move our mission forward, what would that be? If you just had that one magic ask, what would that be? Kevin, do you have anything top of mind that you would say I would absolutely ask for?
Yeah, one word: patient. Particularly from our customers and our partners, we're very focused on delivering them a solution that they're going to be very happy with. But for all the reasons that we just discussed, and everyone mentioned, there are delays at the moment, and things are different to the right. We will overcome them collectively as an industry, but we'll take a bit of time. So yeah, patience would be the number one.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. Ryan, what's your ask for the industry or for people out there right now?
I think for the industry, the thing to keep in mind is that different parts of this manufacturing supply chain have been viewed as, discrete industries in the past when we had a linear supply chain, each person kind of with their head down working in their own environment. But unlike hydrocarbons, unlike oil and gas products that are consumed when you use them, these elements in batteries, if handled correctly, are never consumed. Once they're put into the field, they can essentially last there indefinitely. So as we now move to a circular economy, a lot of what we've been doing is making these relationships with companies up and downstream of us in the circular economy that really let us form these types of relationships and alliances and partnerships that make this one single entity. So as we work with the big, automotive OEMs and the cell manufacturing companies and the chemical refiners, we're able to essentially make one loop per geographic region, which can essentially support this entire industry. And when you do that, you have that, guaranteed security of supply. You have much lower cost of supply by working across those different boundaries, and you have that visibility into your supply chain and its environmental impact. So it's something that's already happening as we formalize these relationships. But I would just say to think about this much more as a circular economy instead of a linear one, and the advantages that we can have by only mining these metals once and then having access to them indefinitely going forward.
That makes complete sense. Thank you. Andrew, what would your ask be? What would you ask people out there to do that would forward our mission?
I think the industry single charge protocol, and I think, the adoption's coming, but I think there just needs to be a wider variety and, reducing anxiety. And so the only way that you're going to do that is today with the government stepping in and subsidizing. So the industry on one side, I think it's a single protocol. And I think, as a whole, I think voters, people have to speak up and have the government help subsidize this. It's, I think it's important for our future. So.
I agree. Alf?
Yeah, I would echo what Andrew just said. I'd add one more thing on to the legislation. I think we should have legislation for any commercial or residential buildings that are renovated or new construction, that they integrate solar for clean energy. Solar is going to have to play a massive part because the utility grids can't cope with a switch from petroleum-based products, gasoline and diesel, into pure electric right now. There just isn't the power capabilities. And, we see it, our most progressive state legislation, California, can barely keep a water and electricity supply going, yet they're where we grow most of our crops. So I think the utilities can't get there on their own. I think there's an unspoken thing out there, which is if I charge my vehicle only with clean energy that I take from the sun and I store. But currently the carbon footprint, if you're taking and charging a vehicle from anything that's using a fossil fuel, be it coal or compressed gas or whatever, for electricity consumption, actually creates a bigger carbon footprint than the EV itself, because the generation of that energy is a bigger carbon footprint than the value of the EV vehicle. So people need to really understand the science behind what's going on here and what we need to do. And I think more solar-based energy production in residential and commercial is required desperately to support the grid's capabilities.
Yeah, I agree. So the one thing as a retail consumer, right, I can ask people is that they go and test drive an EV before they buy a new vehicle, right? That's my ask if I get a vote. And Alf referenced that, yes, I do drive an EV, and I'm pretty well known for being bearish on a company starting with the letter T. Doesn't mean I hate EVs. And I went into the showroom, knowing a lot about that car that I was looking at and kind of making fun of the sales guy. And he tossed me the keys and said, "Bring it back when you're done." And I was like, oh my God, driven a lot of EVs. This one blew my mind. I said, great, okay. I'm not going to buy a nice car. I'm buying an EV. And if everybody does that, I think adoption would be actually quite a lot faster, because there's really some strange hesitancy to trying something new.
I agree with you 100%, and particularly in commercial, where things like torque, the EV, what EVs can deliver in terms of torque, what's needed by commercial vehicles, that should be a game changer. It's fun for us to rocket from 0 to 60 from the lights in 2 seconds, right? There's a passenger car, but the torque and things that EV can provide for the commercial fleet industry have huge advantages to the way they run their vehicles right now. So it should be a slam dunk for all.
Yeah, no, understood. So there's actually a bunch of questions. Callie, should I go ahead and take questions from the audience now over the chat or over the...
I would do it over the Q&A, and I think we have time for a few audience questions if you want to look through the Q&A section.
Okay, excellent. The first one I'm going to take is actually a question directed to Ryan. Does ABTC expect to work only through its own recycling facilities, or is it possible that you partner with other companies to build dedicated facilities in the future? Maybe a large automotive EV producers.
So like I mentioned, I think one of the most important things about this industry is, as we move to that circular economy, it's formalizing relationships with companies up and downstream. So upstream of us are the automotive OEMs. Downstream of us are a lot of the large chemical refining companies. So we have already, won a few competitions from those companies. A few of them have chosen to partner with us on these, government grants and demonstration projects. So we are definitely working with companies within this industry. And more than just work with, what actually makes quite a bit of sense is more, co-location, physically building our commercial facilities on the same or on adjoining property to many of our potential partners. And this really works to minimize a lot of those transportation and regulatory costs, and really just helps to, again, lock down that security of supply. So the answer is yes, we're already doing demonstration projects with both the automotive side upstream, and then also with more of the chemical refining companies downstream.
Cool, so stay tuned, I guess, right? That's the good news.
It's in the works.
Yes. Next question's for Kevin, and I kind of like this question, right? When you explain the hard to decarbonize industries, right, and that's where you really are getting a lot of success and traction. This question actually asks and identifies that as sort of a destination type model, where you're bringing the solution to them at a destination where it's an individual location or largely, a fixed route, I would guess. How does a company focus on a destination and do that really well?
Yeah, it's a very astute observation and question, and part of our strategy. Yeah. It's very much part of our strategy that we wanted to focus on sectors where, maybe it's not the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is definitely a destination. I wouldn't call a mine site a destination per se. It's a closed circuit. And as a consequence, range anxiety is not an issue. And in most circumstances, as I mentioned before, the economics really stack up, and the driver of the decision to embrace electrification of heat. So if we take the Tottenham Hotspur example, what we're doing for them is we're building a complete SDS solution at the training ground in North London, and that encompasses supplying Tembo vehicles to replace the basically golf buggies that they use around the training ground at the moment. And in addition to that, there'll be solar panels, microgrid, charge stations, etc. It's a big site, it's 70 plus acres. And then separately for the stadium, there's potentially an option to put a battery on plus microgrid as well. It's a really good question. It's part of our strategy, and in order for a company to do that well, they need to think holistically about what they need to do to the mine site. So they just can't go, okay, it's cool to electrify our fleet, so let's do it. They need to think about what does that mean for the mine site, and particularly for some of the mining companies where the electrical infrastructure is very old, 20, 30 years, there's a ton of work to be done. But the key point is it is economic for them to do that today.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So the next question is for Alf. So I'll rephrase their question, right? So you had a lot of traction out there with partners like BYD, right, with Wave. And Wave seems to be getting a lot of attention, not just from commercial industrial customers, but potentially from some of the consumer vehicle OEMs. Is the Wave inductive charging technology available, possibly for these emerging OEMs or already emerged EV OEMs to potentially implement solutions for customers? How diverse do you see the pipeline of Wave opportunities being right now?
Yeah, there's really two types of opportunities that Wave's looking at right now. And I'm going to caveat my answer by saying, everybody's talking to everybody in the industry. Wave's getting a lot of attention because it's got a mature in-market product. And there's really, mature products are the safest bet for people to take a look at. But there's two interesting opportunities. One is the commercial fleet operators looking to bring Wave in with an eye towards autonomous as well, because the wireless charging systems suit autonomous driving capabilities. And the second one is the major OEMs as well. The OEMs need to do integration work for the Wave system to work. The Wave system has a unit that is placed in the ground, as you know, Craig, as the charging unit, but there's pads that get connected to the underneath of the vehicle to, authorize and enable the energy transfer. So a lot of the OEMs are very interested in better understanding how to work with Wave, because we're in the same conversation streams with the same commercial fleet operators. So whether it's the commercial fleet operator kind of forcing the issue, or the OEM trying to sell their electric vehicles, particularly heavy trucks, buses, things like that, into commercial fleet operators and being asked to work with Wave, or approaching Wave to say, hey, I know that you're working with this particular commercial fleet operator, how can we get integration work done? So I caveat that with saying everybody's talking to everyone. We are seeing tremendous interest in Wave now. We are expanding the team, their capabilities, their manufacturing, and supply line capabilities to meet the order demand. But we are privileged to have one of the most high-profile charging systems out there, and as a result, you can expect everybody in every area of the supply chain to want to come and talk to you about that, and that's what's happening.
Excellent. That's really great to hear. That's cool. Andrew, there's a question that asks, do your customer sales end up really starting with the corporate entity, the institutional site owner, right? The retail owner, or are they really started by EV owners and EV drivers communicating with those site owners that they really want this to be available at their properties? I mean, I guess the question is really about the genesis of the sales cycle with your customers. Does it start with the fact that EV drivers spend very often double what non-EV drivers do in convenience stores, etc.?
Yeah, for the channel we're focused on, no, it doesn't. It's not. For the channel that we're focused on, these are deep-seated automotive relationships. It's not being driven by consumers at all. Remember, we have a very, very laser focus on the 17,000 U.S. auto dealers. So we're not out trying to be everything to everybody. So in our pursuit of that, we have a very strategic, business development process that we follow. But I think, as you zoom out in some of those other places, I could see them probably being driven by the spend of an EV customer, but that's not what we focus on.
And then maybe I can ask you a question. So one thing I get asked by institutional investors all the time is, how serious are the big three in Detroit, right? There's one company that maybe name begins with T, puts all its cards on the table and paints them different colors, from week to week, right? And very often what's represented is adjusted, changed, down modulated. And that's not the cultural approach out of the traditional automotive OEMs. They tend to put their cards on the table when they're ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing,
how committed are they, right? And how far are they is the big question.
I mean, just think about the disruption taking place here. Even with Tesla having a lack of traditional auto dealer network and whatnot, this is a massive disruption taking place here. I think that, do I think the big three are going to still be around and have to address this? Absolutely. But, you've got someone, you've got the Henry Ford of our generation in Elon Musk, and he's an unbelievable lightning rod for things. And I think that, I think he's brutally transparent, which I think is some people love and some people hate. But I think that, he's the one pulling us all into the future, and he's forcing this conversation at a level that might not have been forced by the big three. Certainly not by the fossil fuel industry. They're not racing into this. But I think that, we're just so early on. And when the Henry Ford of our generation is someone who is transparent, and with the way that media is today, and his ability to tweet and move things, I think it's an unbelievable time in our history, but it's also a sign of the time of our history, which is the big traditional guys that are rethink their entire corporate strategy, where they could go the way of the dinosaur. I don't think it's going to happen probably, anytime soon, but, there's disruption coming. And I think that, all of us could learn a thing or two from what Tesla has done. And that's why, I'm so bullish on this, because I think that, the other guys are catching up, but it's going to be 20, 30, 40 years of building to take it.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful answer. Actually, I will say that I've been avoiding the Tesla questions. There are a ton of questions related to Tesla in the queue. So maybe I should ask each of you sort of a Tesla question. They are such an icon and such a leader, and as you said, Andrew, Elon Musk is a real lightning rod. People react almost to anything that he does. But some of you have hired former Tesla employees. Ryan, you are a former Tesla employee. Maybe I'll ask it slightly differently to each of you. So maybe I should start with you, Ryan. How does your experience there shape the way that you have set up your company and the way you're pursuing the market?
I mean, I worked there about 4 years, and many things I try to carry over to here, to American Battery Technology Company, and many things I intentionally avoid and don't bring over. So there's the good and the bad. I mean, especially back in the early days, when I started, the battery gigafactory was still just a patch of dirt. We hadn't even broke ground yet. So it was much more of a startup itself. There were about 15 of us in the Nevada division, told to go build the biggest factory in the world, to make the best batteries in the world, and to do so without consuming any energy. So it was this really ambitious target and large amounts of resources behind us. And I think my favorite part was the enemy was the status quo. Never do anything just because it's always been done that way beforehand. Every decision needs to really be based on first principles physics limits. Just because it's always been done is a horrible reason to do things again. So I think challenging norms, working from fundamentals, that is something I really appreciated while there, and something we do here as well. I think the things I avoid are really, really trying to move at paces will cause problems down the road. Seeing problems are going to happen and making decisions anyway, just because you have to hit near-term goals. I think it really is important to combine long-term strategy with short-term strategy. And people tend to have a recency bias. People always say, what was it like working at, such a highly valued company? Understand that really is just the past 6 or 12 months. For the 4 years I was there were, it's been publicly stated, there were 3 different times Tesla actually drew up, bankruptcy papers. Like, we were on the edge for years. It was not a highly valued company. It was not even really respected company or taken seriously in the automotive industry. That is really just the past few years. So when you say, are the big 3 taking this seriously? Last year Tesla made almost 500,000 vehicles. There are about 80 million vehicles sold in the world. The big 3 made almost 10 million apiece. So what Tesla puts out is still really just one factory for what the big 3 automakers make. So they still have that economy of scale advantage. And a lot of their decisions to partner in JV with some of the leading battery companies has really been a positive move for them. I would just say that it's still a really big difference between making 10 million vehicles a year and making 500,000. And the Tesla powertrain is probably still the best in the world. But a lot of our issues early on were on much more of the vehicle manufacturing itself, getting doors to fit right, getting windows to seal, working with service centers. Those are things that the big 3 have had decades of experience with, that Tesla is still working to catch up much more on the non-powertrain portions of the vehicle.
Excellent. Thank you. It's a great overview of your experience there. Alf, you've hired a couple ex-Tesla guys. I think one of them in Wave. And how would you say the experience they bring helps shape the dialogue and the conversation in the company? I mean, is this a pedigree that ensures success, or is it individual to individual? I think there's a lot of learning that happens, right?
Yeah, I think the one thing you see that the guys who have come in, who are previously from Tesla, bring in is they bring in a way to pressure test conventional thinking. And there's still a lot of people in the industry trying to build EV in the way that they build combustion engine vehicles. And so, having this intensity to get things done today, it's a big thing I try and push with my team, before we finish the day, make sure you've done something that move the company forward. I think that comes baked in with the folks who have been, exposed to the Tesla organization. I think challenging and pressure testing, as I said, conventional thinking to try and find new ways to do things is very interesting. It's important to us because often we're, with things like wave, we're at the cutting edge of technology in terms of charging. I also happen to think that Tesla is an interesting company because it's done something that the other OEMs haven't done, and that is it's participating in the energy as well. And they're not just an auto manufacturer. Okay, automotive vehicles are a way to discharge a large amount of electrical energy. But he also has assets that can generate that energy from solar and can store it as well. And I think that's where a lot of, you and I can go back and forwards on this for a couple of hours, Craig, but that's where I think long-term is the ultimate big win for companies such as Tesla, in that they're in the energy space as well as the vehicle OEM space. And I think that's the piece that previously was bifurcated between the petroleum industry and the vehicle manufacturers, and Tesla's knitted both of those together. And again, the energy has always been and will continue to be in the future a much larger economy than making vehicles. And I think that's where you want to be participating. So I feel much more optimistic when I look at a Tesla and where they're going versus a pure play OEM EV manufacturer. And we have interest in some of those lines of business as well, as because I think when it comes to separate the men from the boys, automotive manufacturing is an unforgiving, balance sheet heavy business. If you do not have other recurring revenue streams in your business through energy storage, energy supply, even data services, which we all hope will be a monetizable asset in the future with the telematics coming off these vehicles. You don't have those additional streams, you're going to go through the same economic cycles that the automotive manufacturers have through boom and bust through the last 100 years. So, I love getting additional opinions into the business. I love getting challenging conventional thinking, and I think that's what, not just from folks who are previously with that organization, but folks can come in from any angle. But that's the type of employees we've been looking for, and we were able to get some of those, from Tesla.
Excellent. So, Kevin, when I look at the sort of big picture, I can imagine you show up at a new prospect, a new prospective customer site, and if there's electric vehicles in the parking lot like Tesla's, it sets you up for a much easier conversation and a much easier sales cycle. But how does Tesla impact what you do, given that they really do have such an incredible footprint in the space?
Similar to what Alf was saying, we do look for, and we do have a couple of people in the company as well. And what defines them for me is their pain threshold, their ability to work at pace, and that's the stage we're at in terms of business. We're trying to hyperscale over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the DNA and the culture we need to have. So the more of that we can bring in, the better. With respect to engaging with customers and in fact even engaging internally, the ex-Tesla folk, I guess, come with that badge and come with that credibility of having worked for a company that has been very successful, as Ron in the last 12 months. I actually did visit Tesla and SpaceX in 2013, so I kind of got a view behind the scenes back then, and that sense of pace was there back then as well. So I think it's more impacting on our internal culture and how we want to operate.
Thank you. So, Andrew, I think you nailed it. The Henry Ford of our generation, right? And the point that I would want to make to everyone on this phone is you look at the ecosystem that popped up around Ford, all those tier one automotive parts suppliers, the service companies, the competition that mimicked and bettered the mass production technologies, and the component suppliers that we don't even imagined as sort of regular drivers of ICE vehicles. I think you nailed it, and it's a good analogy for the opportunity in front of us. I mean, is there anything else you would add just on top of what you said before?
No, I mean, I firmly believe. I mean, I think the difference with this particular cycle of time is we're in the midst of a couple of transformational technologies that have never occurred kind of simultaneously. The advent of artificial intelligence and all the clean tech stuff coming. But with blockchain and all these other things, this is an exciting time to be around. And so, I thank you guys for having, organizing this, but no, I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the opportunity just to learn in this opportunity.
Perfect. So I want to say thank you to everybody that joined us on the line today for the webinar, and thank you, of course, to our panelists and our partners, of course.
Thank you, everyone.
Really appreciate it. I said you did a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I love these things. We've got thought leaders here.
Yes, without doubt. The amount of experience and intelligence on this panel is amazing. So I can't thank you guys enough. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.